Hello, welcome everyone to another delightful episode of High Tea with Honey. I'm your host, Honey Premlal, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today. We have a very special guest joining us, a powerhouse in storytelling and a true champion for inclusivity and diversity. Please join me welcoming in remarkable Kim Rowell. Kim is an extraordinary storyteller who has dedicated her career to amplifying voices from underrepresented communities. With an impressive portfolio of creative content over 15 years, she has made significant contribution to major broadcasters and publishers in the United Kingdom, including BBC, ITN News Productions, Channel 4, and The Telegraph. Her award-winning work has not only sparked debates in the Parliament, also led to laws being challenged and changed. Kim's dedication and impact are truly inspiring. I'm so excited to delve into her journey and insights today. So grab a cup of tea, sit back and relax. Let's delve into fascinating conversation with Kim. Kim, welcome to High Tea with Honey. It's a pleasure to have you on board. How are you today?
Oh, thank you. I'm really good, thank you. Thank you so much for asking me. It's lovely to see you and lovely to be having this conversation.
So Kim, can you tell us a bit about your early life in North Devon and how your socio-economic background influenced in your career path?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting because obviously I reflect on it now from the point that I'm at in my life, and I think at the time, I love North Devon, and it's really funny because as I grew up, I tried to escape it. I was like, there's nothing going on here. I don't want to stay. I want to kind of go off and explore the world. And now every opportunity I get, I try and go back because it's so beautiful, and it's the people there are wonderful, and the sense of community, and I still have family down there. But yeah, growing up was fun, and we never used to lock our front door. We lived really close to a park. I was thinking because obviously I'm speaking to you during summer and during our summer holidays. I can't really remember what we got up to because it was just the freedom to go and explore like wide open spaces and things like that. And I think now, like I say, in retrospect, I realised we weren't massively fortunate when it came to money. Like we wouldn't go abroad for holidays. It was really, like I say, the reality of it at the time didn't register with me because it was love. Like I was always surrounded by love, and my parents, my mum separated from my biological father when I was very small, like a baby. I have no memory of him, and that relationship's been quite tumultuous. But my stepfather was around from when I was about the age of 3, and he's my dad. He's a wonderful person, and he stepped in every way, shape, and form that you can imagine. But yeah, I mean there were real hardships and sacrifices, and I was also very aware that my mum would on occasion go without eating so that we had food and things like that. But again, when you're a kid, like I have a daughter now, you're I see it through her eyes in the sense that you're looking after yourself. Obviously, you're very aware of your surroundings and you care about things
Yeah.
and people, but it's quite selfish in a way. As long as you're served and your needs are served, then that's fine. And I don't think it was necessarily until I went to university. I went to Leeds University, and I realised then I was like, oh wow, there's like a massive chasm here between me and my upbringing and everybody else. And my sister had been to university, but I think I'm right in saying she was one of the first people in our family to have gone. So when I went, yeah, I really, really struggled, and I worked multiple part-time jobs to try and afford to stay there ultimately. And I did have to take out a hardship loan to finish university because I think maybe I was naive, maybe there was a massive element of naivety to it. I just
Yeah.
wanted these things. My mum never told me that I couldn't, you can pursue them, go for it, great. But then the actual practicality of it was a little bit harder, I think.
Yeah, it may remind me of my childhood. I'm born and raised in southern India, Kerala. It's a small village, and we're growing up in a small village and with basic, necessities. It's obviously it reminds you of. I think then those learning and that stay with you forever, isn't it? That stay you grounded. I think
Yeah.
that's the take I take. I think that's where I think I can see you a very humble person. I think that probably would give you that lesson for your life, isn't it? Sometimes, yeah.
I think so. And I think a lot of the joy and the happiness that I had came out of free things like hanging out with my friends, even like from a really young age, and all the things. I was like really into sport and I loved running. And again, like running is free, so again, it's not necessarily then about socioeconomics, because it's more about passion and love and enjoyment and enthusiasm and personal motivation and drive and those kinds of things, which I think
Yeah.
maybe my background helped spur me on and maybe gave me a little bit more fire potentially. But like I say, when you're really young, I did have no real concept of what that or how that was factored into my being or myself in that way.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think the small things make you happier, right? Not the big tickets, is it? Because sometimes when you get the big things, you don't feel that much happiness when the small thing you mentioned in life is much more worthwhile,
Yeah,
isn't
and
it?
yeah, I agree completely. And I think I really try and force myself now that whenever you achieve something, maybe even like a really like kind of not like mass like macro, more like the micro things, you have to really try and celebrate them and acknowledge them, because I don't want it to ever feel insignificant, because I think life can be really bloody hard a lot of the time, and you need these little moments of joy that keep you
Yeah,
going, and it's really important. It's really
yeah,
important.
yeah, I agree. I think after COVID, everyone started, thinking those ways rather than the big stuff. So it's wonderful to hear your stories to start with. I know your passion for gender equality. So what that means to you? I know you're a trustee of UN Women and so many stuff. So how do you get into that world? What excites you?
Oh, it's fascinating. I think I've worked throughout, like more recently in my career, in all fairness, I've worked with a couple of coaches and they try to help me figure out what my drivers are in life. And I can be fairly outspoken and it's got me in hot water occasionally, but they help me kind of find the root cause of that. And I don't like injustice. Even again, we're talking about the macro micro thing, even on like a really micro level. If I think someone's being rude or, inauthentic or talking nonsense, I will call it out. I don't like it. It doesn't sit well with me. And I think I've
Yeah,
always I talk a lot about kind of going with your gut feeling. I think a lot of the time you really know when something is challenging your ethics or something doesn't sit well with you internally, and you feel
yeah,
uncomfortable.
yeah,
And I think whenever I feel uncomfortable, and it's easier for me now. I mean, not so much as obviously as I was
yeah,
establishing myself and figuring out what it was I actually wanted to do,
mm,
because I think then I was a little bit. People used to look at me and be like, "Why? Like, why are you causing a fuss? Why should we listen to you?"
mm,
And I had this really fascinating incident where there was a kind of a friend of mine who had obviously like an acquaintance, and she was training to be a coach, and she wanted to kind of practice on people. And she said to me at this point, she said, like, why you? Like, why should it be you? I don't think she necessarily meant it in the tone that I've just said it,
yeah,
but I just thought in that moment I was like, but why not me? Because I feel like there's so much that has happened throughout my career, and not just career, like life, like genuine life experiences that I feel have
yeah,
kind of added to my armory and made me stronger and fortified my own existence. And if I can pay that forward, impart some knowledge, help other people in some way. And I think particularly when it comes to gender equality within the media landscape in particular,
yeah,
we've now started. I mean, I work at ITN and they're very good in regularly reporting like their diversity stats, their gender balance and what they actually put out on screen. But it's still not great, it still feels like there's a really long way to go to get to any level of parity. And even there was something even on LinkedIn the other day, which was a video from 6 years ago, when a man was directing men up the escalator at the Tube and women had to walk up the stairs, because men are way more likely to get to the top twice as quick as women will. And there are more CEOs still called John than there are any women, which is just like completely bonkers. And I think beyond that, I think again through the work, I did a lot of work, particularly at the BBC, with grassroots communities and really trying to tell more nuanced stories from all different sectors of society. Again, potentially also with a socio-economic skew, but we work really hard to tell those stories and really try and amplify them. And I think, bringing that into public attention, the brilliance of the BBC is that it's almost like organic. People will watch it because it's the BBC, and you have that audience kind of already, and you don't have to fight for it as much necessarily. And it was brilliant to be able to invoke even those like incremental bits of change that we managed to achieve. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't really answer your question about gender equality, but
Have you seen a change in the last decade or so? In the media industry, we've seen the shift. I know it's in the sector I work in, housing. That's where I wish, and we're trying to bring women together and talk about issues as well. So, have you seen any change?
I think the difference now is the power of networks. And I think I say that in the sense that I am an absolutely rubbish networker. Not rubbish, I suppose rubbish is the wrong assessment. I think I don't enjoy
You're very
it.
good at networking. You came to the event, you talk to
Yes,
everyone.
exactly. Exactly. You're in a room, you don't necessarily know anybody. So often I'll go to these things on my own, and I'm like, how do I start a conversation? But I think it's finding your tribe. It's finding the people that make you feel comfortable in your own skin, the people that are just open and welcoming, even if it's a physical, embrace, or like, oh, joyful to see you kind of approach, or it's literally like, come along, anything goes, we want to discuss everything and anything. I think now that feels to me like the difference, because before that I really struggled to find where I fit in. And I think the first thing that changed that for me was a network called Women of the Future, who also do kindness awards and also do the Asian Women of Achievement Awards. And their program, I at the time was working at the Telegraph on a mental health podcast with Bryony Gordon, and our first interview was with Prince Harry, and we did like 3 series. I did 3 series. She went on to do more, and I won an award with them. But I think the thing that did, up until that point, I'd always been producing things, or I'd always been supporting people. I'd never been on the flip side of it. And I think the acknowledgement of my role and my efforts being deserved or deserved of an award, that gave me this level of confidence that I don't think I'd had before, and the sense of faith and belief in me as a person and me as an individual. And I also find it really fascinating, like all the best things in my career have happened since I had my daughter, because I knew that if I was going to be away from her, it had to be for a really decent reason. If I wasn't going to be with her,
It's a
if
sacrifice
I
you
was
make,
working
isn't it? Yeah.
completely, but if I was going to do that, it had to be because I was doing something that was meaningful, and it had to be meaningful to me, not to anybody else. So yeah, and also there are wonderful, wonderful networks like WACL, which is Women in Advertising and Comms Leadership, and they really, really work very hard in the gender equality, gender equity space, in the sense that in those industries, I suppose not too dissimilar from housing, really, you're finding a band of really influential people that can push and lean and ask for change, and that seems to be the most fruitful way of making any kind of difference.
You mentioned about leaving the media industry due to the financial struggles. How did you overcome those challenges? Must be quite difficult for you to navigate through those journeys.
Yeah, massively. And I always wanted to work in London. So my first job out of uni, I actually worked in a petrol station for 9 months because I couldn't find a job. Again, I think there was a level of naivety to be like, oh, here we go, I'm going to get a job, and I didn't. But again, I did loads and loads of work experience. Like I probably worked for free if you totted it up for the equivalent of a couple of years to try and actually get people to pay attention to me and taking this seriously. And I went to work for a company called 24, and they made things like the Hotel Inspector and a lot of the travel logged style program and things like that. And then I moved to London at the time following my boyfriend, and that didn't last. That lasted like a couple of months after I moved, but anyway. And then when I moved to London, it was such a shock to the system because I'd had no concept of living in a big city. I literally didn't even know where to even go about finding somewhere to stay. I didn't have any friends. I didn't have any family that lived there. It was really expensive. I remember looking around this there was an agency, and they were showing people around, mainly like foreign students and myself, and it was like the bed pulled down from the wardrobe, and there was a hob, and then you shared the toilet. And I remember this one toilet still had the loo brush in the toilet, and I was like, oh my god, this is disastrous. But I ended up finding a flat share with a couple, and they didn't have a washing machine. I had to go to the laundrette and do my pants and stuff every week. And then I just remember, and then I was working, that job was working at GMTV, which is Good Morning Britain, so the breakfast television programme for ITV. And I vividly remember there was a Lloyd's Bank just down the road, and I kept having to extend my overdraft. I was like several £1,000s into my overdraft. And then the bank manager called me in, and he was like, oh God, can you not like ask for a pay rise or anything like that? And I literally remember sitting in his office and bursting into tears, being like, I haven't eaten properly for weeks, and I can't afford like hygiene products. I couldn't afford shampoo, I couldn't afford soap or deodorant, and all of these things actually make a huge difference. If I turn up somewhere looking greasy, you know, if it affects
It's
your
obviously you
appearance.
on media industry as well. You do, or even any jobs, is it? You can't just walk in like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't. In all fairness, from that, I was really. I think from that point, I think it was a bit of a turning point. I was like, I need to push a bit harder here. I'm gonna have to probably take some risks and make some changes, because my only option at that point was to change jobs and to try and
Yeah.
get a pay
Yeah.
rise, which I did. And this then started this really interesting part of my career where I was made redundant 3 times in 5 years. And I think that initial jump was because I wanted a few more £1,000s on my salary so I could actually afford to live in London properly. I did that job for a year at Fremantle, which is part of Talkback, and they make the X Factor and Britain's Got Talent and big shiny floor shows. And I was made redundant from that after a year, as I say. And then some work that I'd done whilst I was there came to fruition in like the interactive production side of things with Channel 4. So I then actually was very fortunate to go and work with Channel 4 for a couple of years. So I was then made redundant from Channel 4, but it was great because that was my first foray back into like proper programming, because I have a degree in journalism and I wasn't using it. I was just having a lot of fun on all these big kind of shiny floor shows. And then I was made redundant from Channel 4 and went to work for the Telegraph shortly after that. But in the interim, I remember that, so I'm kind of going off on a tangent a little bit, but like the period between finishing at Channel 4 and starting the Telegraph, I actually worked in Clinton Cards at Christmas because I'd run out of money. I had no money. And it was in West. I wish it did. It would have made it more enjoyable, I swear. But there's a shopping mall in Oxford that they had Clinton Cards in, and I was so, let's just say, rubbish at my job. I actually got locked in one evening because I didn't manage to get out of the shopping centre in time. And I remember like banging on the door of Primark, being like, "Can you let me out? I'm stuck in Clinton Cards." And yeah, that was a low point. But then I'm not even kidding. Within a year, I was working at the Telegraph, and I was back in Oxford because I was doing a TEDx talk about storytelling. So within the space of a year, I'd gone from being redundant, working Christmas hours at Clinton Cards and getting locked in a shopping centre, to
And
doing a TEDx talk at Oxford
wow.
Union on storytelling. So when you think like if you're trying to then make sense of
Yeah.
that, and you're like from a mental health point of view, that's a real like roller coaster.
Yeah. How did you keep up with all the lows and highs? It's hard, isn't it? Because the moment. So what advice you would give to someone going through redundancy or they're facing? Because that is happening everywhere, isn't it? Because it is a difficult
Yeah,
climate.
absolutely.
Yeah. How do you think they
I would
should look at that?
I would say just hold on because everything passes. Like the good, the bad, and the irrelevant, it's all a phase. Even if you're going through something truly, truly terrible, firstly, like, I'm so sorry, but like hold on because it will not, I promise you, it will not always be like that. Same goes for something incredibly joyful. I remember Andy Murray, the tennis player, he said when he first won Wimbledon, like his whole career had been building up to that point, and then within a week, all the attention went away, all the accolade had disappeared, and he was like, "Oh, so do I just carry on then?" It's just like, so you have to derive your own meaning from what
Yeah.
you're doing. You have to get your own sense of satisfaction out of what you're doing because, like I say, it's all a phase. It literally, there is a churn, but you have to obviously acknowledge it too. Acknowledge when it's terrible. Acknowledge when it's good because you need to emotionally feel that difference because then
Yeah.
it helps you process the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Especially when you fall, the higher you get to, the falling can be more painful, isn't it? So you
Of
just need to
course.
stay grounded. I think that's the best thing you can do. At least then, even if you
Yeah.
fall or fail, you don't
Yeah.
feel that much pain, maybe. Yeah.
I think yes, exactly. And I just think it's weird because I'm not afraid of failure at all anymore. I used to be, and it used to stop me from doing things, but now I embrace it, and you just got to keep. I think the thing is to try and keep moving forwards, like you say, even if you suffer a redundancy when you've been the CEO of a company, and you literally then like, wow, what happened there? But the thing is, you need to separate it. It's not personal. It's not about you. It's an organizational decision where they've obviously decided to rearrange, restructure, reorganize. Like each time that I spoke about like Fremantle, the Channel 4 and the Telegraph, I was always okay. And I always actually came back to the industry at a better point. And I think it was because I learned, I mean, obviously, I wasn't ever like diagnosed as being depressed, but there were some real low points. But
Yeah.
each time I mean myself, they're talking about myself here, it's very personal, but I was able to try and remember my self-worth, remember my value, and almost just carry that burden on my own shoulders and don't worry about what other people think of you. Worry about the things that you can control. You
Yeah.
can't control how
Yeah.
other people will perceive you. All you can control is yourself, like your actions, your mindset.
Often people worry about things outside your control, and then you get into that loop, isn't it? Then you're not coming out of it. I think
Yeah,
3 times redundancy. I know I've gone through once. I remember the feeling. So 3 times, and you came out even stronger. So I'm sure you learned a lot of lessons, and obviously it's about learning lessons, isn't it? All the experience, and make the best out of those experiences. So. Um,
yeah. Thank you.
so you're very good at storytelling and also amplifying the voices for underrepresented communities. So can you talk about a project or something you have done you're proud about? Anything?
Oh, there's lots of things. I think there's lots of things. It's really hard to pinpoint something in particular. I'll try and give like a quick example and try not to go on forever, I suppose. I wrote one of the first things I think in my kind of journey through life was I'd written a mental health children's book for my daughter when she was born. And it was come off the back of working on these mental health podcasts, and that was called Townie Spider. And it was about a spider who's in a wing mirror in the town, he ends up in the countryside. And it was more about trying to get children to understand their feelings. And I was really happy that I'd pushed for that, had got a wonderful illustrator involved, and the book was published and it's like widely available. I suppose that on a personal level, that was a great piece of storytelling. But I think when it comes to my work, when I was at the Telegraph was the first time that I had the opportunity to start telling really important stories. And when I mean important, I think whenever I talk about storytelling, the most resonance that I get from a story is the person or the detail of someone's journey or what they learn. I don't really like the J word, but journey is a good one. At the Telegraph, there was a piece that we did on Russia denying the existence of HIV and how the community was completely suffering, and we did it in collaboration with the Foreign Desk, and it was at a time when you were still able to travel quite freely in Russia, and it was a beautiful piece of filmmaking made by a young lady called 𝐰𝐢𝐭𝐡 primarily, and she did a wonderful job. But unfortunately with the Telegraph, and part of the reason why I would assume I was made redundant, they could never quite figure out how to get these wonderful pieces of video to the wider industry, to the wider world, and the disconnect between the paper and the online multimedia side. But then at the BBC, there were so many things that we did, which were just the talent at the BBC is ridiculous. Like the journalists that I worked with, but there was several. There was one called Split Up in Care, Life Without Siblings, which is about how siblings were separated in care around the country, so they weren't keeping sibling groups together. And then we had another one called Sold, Sex Slaves Next Door, and we did that over a 2-year period, talking how police forces in this country can't manage sex trafficking because it's so prevalent, there's so much. They're now actually having to work with the traffickers to actually try and manage it rather than stop it. And then I think one of the most brilliant pieces that I've had the pleasure, it's not mine, I always talk about it, but it's really not my piece of work. It was called sexsomnia, which is it's a condition. If I roll back, the reason we started following this young woman was it was one of the first rape cases that was going to go to court, and then as we followed her, the CPS threw it out because they said that she had this condition called sexsomnia, which is when you can agree to have sex in your sleep. And she's like, hang on a sec, never heard of this, what the hell are you talking about? So we followed her journey through all of that side of things. But then when I joined the UN as a trustee last year, they have a 10-day period in November every year where they have a real focus on violence against women and girls. So we were able to kind of bring in that documentary as a way of kind of bolstering and amplifying what the UN were doing. But also I worked on another short film outside of work with a couple of women that I'd met through the Women of the Future Network. We made a short film called 𝐰𝐢𝐭𝐡, which was about domestic violence in the South Asian community. There's a tiny little charity called the Sharon Project, and everybody kind of works.
I'm aware of that. I know
Yeah.
a couple of people working there as well. Yes, we actually had an event last year, 19 days of action. Yeah, in
Yes.
November. Yeah, against abuse. So yeah, it's very sad. It's really affecting a lot of women, and I don't think it's enough support is there. So it's still not addressed properly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the part that I enjoy now, because with most of the ones that I've spoken about when it comes to the documentary filmmaking type side of it, it's creating the connections, when you work as an exec producer, you're helping to kind of bolster and amplify. And I think now, because I do have connections with UN Women UK, and I've made all of these kind of shorter pieces of content on longer form documentaries, you can connect the dots. I also work with the Thames Valley Committee for the Royal Television Society, and we did a feature there around violence towards women and girls. And I think I was quite proud, because I think it's one of the first times that an organisation like the RTS has actually paid more attention to these more nuanced ways of storytelling and what it takes to portray them and put them into mainstream media. So it's great to be able to draw people's attention to these things.
Yeah, no, media is powerful, isn't it? Because it's more people you can see, and they can say what they can do about it as well. Because it is sadly hidden, not getting much of action. So I know you're a very good role model and mentor. So what advice you give to underrepresented communities who aspire to be working in the media industry or storytelling industry? So What do you think?
I think right now, and I'm sure it'll evolve and develop and change, I think you have to be tenacious. I think maybe the start of my career, I wasn't tenacious enough. I think when people told me no, I'd be like, oh, okay, fine, I'll just get back in there then. But now, like some of the most, I think also it's not necessarily always about skills. Like you don't have to be the perceived best person to do the job. If you feel that you've got a really strong story, or you have a connection or a way in to opening up a community or opening up a really nuanced particular story, that you have the access to great case studies, great people to talk to, it really is illuminating. Because I think that's the other thing, it doesn't have to be as slick as a Netflix documentary which has millions of pounds behind it. I've seen things that are shot on a mobile phone, and it's, I think the storytelling really always pulls through. I think you've got a strong story and a really authentic way of telling it, and it comes from the right place within the people that have pulled together to make it, then you should always pursue it. And don't give up, and don't take a no as a like, well, that's it, that's the end of the game. It's not at all. There are, I think also now, I mean, more when I was starting out, it was all linear. It was all like main broadcast channel. Now you have this proliferation of digital channels, multimedia. People, you see on TikTok, people like making episodic serial content, and it's working for them. And beyond being an influencer, there are some really gritty documentary makers, storytellers on these platforms that are really just going with their gut because they have a drive and a passion. I think a passion has a lot to do with it as well. If your job does not make you happy, you probably should think about doing something else. You need to really get some level of fulfillment out of what you're doing.
Yeah, I think since we have social media is coming much more powerful, you have a bit more opportunities, isn't it? Because you see more and more people coming out of it. Before, if you say 15 years ago, 20 years ago, probably that was more challenging to get into that sort of side, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes that doesn't make sense. I think a lot of the time there's a lot to be said for consistency. People just keep on. It's not just a flash in the pan. I'll do 3, and then if it dies, fine. That was all I ever wanted. But I think there does need to be an element of strategy to it. Like know your audience. Like, who are you making it for? Where are they? Where are you best? What's the best way of getting to them, marketing to them, getting their attention? You need to really, really figure that out before you've done anything. And I think again, when we were commissioning pieces, both at the Telegraph and the BBC, you had to really do a lot of legwork before you made anything. Like, where's this going? What platform? I think that's the whole point of impact. Like I was saying at the Telegraph, when we made that HIV documentary, no one saw it because there was no strategy behind, like, are we going to do any kind of podcast? Can we do this across our Twitter, our socials? What's the best way of cutting through with this remarkable story? And we didn't get it right. But then on the flip side, when I was at the BBC, I was talking about Split Up in Care, the Life Without Siblings story. That went on the one show, I think it was on Woman's Hour, BBC Breakfast, Radio 5 Live. Like, it was 5 minutes on podcast, as well as the longer documentary that went on BBC 3. It was a whole rollout plan, and that included like external marketing and media as well. So you really need to have that all really clear in your mind. Like, what does success look like? And if success looks like, oh, it made my mum happy, brilliant, but at least then what boxes you're trying to tick. Yeah.
So you mentioned about the mental health and podcast, and you also did say it's a tragedy of the suicide during the pandemic. So do you want to share that experience? It must be very hard for you to manage that whole process, is it?
Yeah, it's a really hard thing to talk about, but when the pandemic hit, obviously completely unprecedented, no one really knew what was going on, how long we might all be in these really isolated situations. And I was at the BBC at the time, managing a team of relatively young journalists on making content for their peers. So everything from money, mental health, gender diversity, the environment, those kinds of subjects. And there was a young lady there. She'd been going through some issues in her personal life, and I'd been trying really hard to work with her to try and manage and mitigate and bring it all round. And obviously, there was various points that before this actually happened, and ways of trying to manage it with both her family and the support systems and things that we had in place at the organization. But she did end up taking her own life, and it was right at the start of the pandemic, and it was had to ring some of her closest friends to tell them that
Must be
she'd taken her
so,
own life.
yeah.
And I remember my boss at the time is a really quirky guy, and he's quite funny. And it took him 3 phone calls to me to tell me. He kept trying to tell me, and I was like, I'm not quite sure. I wasn't quite sure what was wrong in the first instance, and eventually he was able to tell me. And it was just again unprecedented. Like, we were in an unprecedented situation during a pandemic and going through something that none of us had ever wanted or thought might happen within our own careers. And then all the things that you would normally do, you probably would have all gathered together, maybe gone down the pub and like talked about her and celebrated her and what have you. We had to do that online. We had to do it over Zoom, and we set off confetti cannons, and her family joined an online Zoom, and it didn't feel right, and it didn't feel good enough. And I think, again, death and grief, they talk about the stages of grief and things like that, and you can't ever deny anybody their own feelings or their way of managing these things. But clearly that was over 4 years ago now, and I would say not a day goes by without me thinking about her at least
Yeah.
once. And I think managing that afterwards as well. I think that was the first time that I'd asked for a coach, because I was like, I don't know
How'd you come out of
what
that?
what
Yeah.
happened there. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think it's ironic, but I did mental health first aid training afterwards, and I've done a refresher since, because I think it's really important just to try and have perspective. And I think, having done that, I realise now there are a lot of things that I probably did a bit wrong, or that were probably a bit misguided. And there was a period of time where I felt responsible to a point, and I don't feel responsible now. But that took a while to get to that place too. But I think the thing that I wish that I'd done more of was just listen to her, because they say that that's what, just need to not interject, not offer up your own, oh, that happened to me, don't worry about it, it's all fine, which is what I did a lot of, to
Yeah.
try and reassure her. But I think more what she needed was just to be heard.
Difficult, isn't it? We don't really expect that to happen, isn't it? Because when you are talking to someone, you're having a normal conversation, you don't think that would happen. So it's difficult to predict anything. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously now I'm talking with the benefit of hindsight and having talked it through a lot. And I'm heartbroken for her family and her friends and all of her potential, because she was
Yeah.
such a fantastic, effervescent, brilliant person. And sadly she's no longer with us. But yeah, and I just, whoever you are, you
Yeah.
need to talk about it. Don't ever feel like you're alone, or don't ever feel like someone wouldn't answer the phone. Like, they will make we like don't ever feel that you
Yeah.
won't be missed. I think that's the thing, because
Kind first. So, what inspired you to kind first? Because it is such a kindness is one of those values I closely, keep to my heart. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that came in the pandemic year, and I think, like, that literally just talking to you now, I've realised that maybe I needed it. I probably needed it at that time too. But it's a global virtual kindness festival, and in the first year, we just went wholeheartedly with it because it was right at the start. That's when it started. There's a brilliant woman called 𝐸𝐲𝐲, and she came up with this idea when she was sat in a doctor's surgery, I think, like maybe pre or mid pandemic, and was like, we need to spread the love, we need to spread kindness. And I think because it was right at the start of the pandemic, it was really well received, and a lot of people, it's all voluntary, like we do it voluntarily, like no one, we don't get paid to do it. We sell the tickets, and any profits we make outside of obviously holding it virtually, you need to have technicians and people to help facilitate all of that side of things, but everything else goes to charity. We've managed to raise thousands of pounds in doing it, which is really remarkable. But the first year it was opened by Captain Sir Tom Moore. We've had people like the Duchess of York take part, Alistair Campbell. We had Bryony Gordon kindly came on, along with a guy called Matt Johnson, who's a TV presenter. But we've had politicians, we've had broadcasters, the wonderful Claudia Hammond, who does a lot of kindness content for Radio 4, along with there's a professor called Robin Banerjee at Sussex University, so there's a lot about academia. And there's an organisation called Compassion in Politics, and they obviously help have conversations around clearly how politics needs to be a little bit more compassionate. But yeah, it's just been so wonderfully well received, and probably bigger than we ever intended it to be. And I mean, this year we are pausing it because this is our 5th year, and I think, like I say, it's all run by volunteers. So it normally happens around World Kindness Day, which is the 13th of November. This year we're taking a little break just so that we can kind of gather our thoughts.
Yeah.
But we all had a lot kind of going on this year. Some of the team had just graduated from doctorates, and we all clearly have like our work day-to-day lives going on. But there's you can buy merchandise for Kindfest. But yeah, if anyone is interested, there's a website of teamkind.org, and we always need more volunteers. So please come and get involved. Like I say, any profits we make go directly to charity. So it's been, yeah, and I'm now a director. Well, it's a community interest company now. I'm a director of the company, and I lead on kind of putting together all their content each year. So it's hard work, but it's fun, and the feeling you have afterwards, I think I'm quite an empathetic person, and it's just so much like love and joy and all the things that aren't massively forthcoming on my usual London commute. But yeah,
I'm sure you touch lots of people's hearts and minds through those kindness projects and things, And a word of kindness sometimes that's just enough, isn't it? It's not just money or anything else. So,
definitely.
so we are coming to very close to the time. So, what advice you give to 20-year-old Kim Rowell?
Oh gosh.
That is just 5 years ago, was it, Kim?
yeah, last year. Wow. I'm not the person I was when I was 20 for sure, but there's a lots of I wouldn't change any of it. Like the good, like I was talking about earlier, the phases, the good, the bad, and ugly, and then the indifferent. My 20-year-old self, I would just say, keep being you, prioritize happiness, and keep working hard.
Excellent. That's a very good advice to all of us, I think. So, is there anything you want to say to our viewers and listeners? So all the stuff fantastic stuff you're doing all this time, and it's absolute listening to you as well. I've learned so much for me to say, each time I fail, not the word fail I should use, but learnings. How do we get back up and run again? I think that's the lesson I learned from you today more than anything.
Yeah, I think just my integrity has always kind of got me through, and I think I talk about it sometimes like a compass. We all have this inner compass, and we know when it's pointing into the right direction, and we know when it's not. And I was talking earlier about gut instinct and all of that side of things. Like, go with your gut, because I would say that 9 times out of 10, that's not going to be too far off kilter. But yeah, just believe in yourself. I think if I'd have maybe believed in myself or had that confidence earlier on, I think I would have started what I'm doing and pushed more boundaries. But yeah, don't give up. Don't give up.
That's a great advice for everyone. Thank you so much, Kim, for joining us today. So that's the end of the episode. So keep doing what you're doing. So obviously the kindness and compassion, all those great stuff you're doing, and making media industry, equality. I think it's one of the greatest things, and UN ambassadors. So all the stuff you're doing, great. Good luck with everything, and thank you so much for joining. And Kim, all the best.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely talking to you. Thank you.